Hi everyone, Pam here. Welcome to another episode of Rights for Women. It is April 30 as I record this. And today we have a great chat with Ber Carroll all about her new book, One of Us is Missing. It's a fantastic book that I really enjoyed and had such a great time talking to Ber about. It's a crime thriller, but kind of on the softer end of the thriller genre and really includes a lot of family drama. There's a lot of secrets. There's so much tension. It's a real page turner. So it was fantastic to talk to Ber about her new release. But also there's a lot of talk in here about her experiences over 20 years as a published author and the kind of downsides of that too, in terms of what happens when you are out of contract and the publisher doesn't pick you up for another book. How Ber has actually managed to navigate that in over 20 years of publishing and really just kind of reinventing herself at different points, staying the distance, continuing to write, which is just the important thing that really comes out of this conversation, I think, is just the importance of writing for the love of it and writing the next book and just being optimistic and thinking, okay, what can I do next? Where can I go? Who might be interested in publishing this book? Will I publish it myself? There's a whole lot of options now, as we know, in terms of publishing. So it was really great to chat to Ber and to hear her experiences in this kind of area. And it was really optimistic, I thought. So lots of chat in there about how to stay published, but also lots of chat in there about the new book, One of Us is Missing. I'm not going to go on too long in this introduction. This is quite a long episode. We did have a few internet glitches. So there's in places some very minor little glitches with the video and with the audio, but they're super minor. So do keep listening because there is so much gold for both readers and writers in this episode. I also wanted to flag that I'll be taking a break for the next 2 weeks after this episode. There won't be any new Rights for Women episodes. So that means you'll be able to catch up on any of the fabulous episodes from this year or from the previous years and the backlist that you may have missed. I'm taking a break because apart from being extraordinarily busy with writing and everything else, I'm just taking the 2 weeks off because next week I'm going to the Stockhorse Nationals in Tamworth to do a little bit of hanging out with my daughter and son-in-law as they ride there and also mind the grandboys. So I'll be doing some family things, but also writing while I'm up there and getting the workshops all ready for the next chapter retreat, which is happening in 2 weeks' time from today. I can't believe it. I've got 12 fabulous writers coming on the retreat and I really have a lot of work to do to get ready for that. So won't be in your ears, won't be seeing you on YouTube for the next couple of weeks, but stay tuned for what's coming up next after that. We have a great interview with Mary Lou Stevens interviewing Julie Bennett about her new book, The Lost Letters of Rose Carey. And also Maya Linnell will be coming up in June talking to Catherine Centre about her new book, The Rom-Commers. Hope that you're really enjoying the podcast. If you are, as always, it would be fantastic if you can leave some reviews. It just means that more people will get to hear about the podcast. It pushes us up in the rankings. And a shout out again to all the people following along on the Diary of a Procrastinator for Patreon. That is rolling along behind the scenes, and I'm putting out about 3 very short videos a week to the Patreon family supporters talking about my writing process, the obstacles that I'm finding and how I'm overcoming them, and any of the things I'm doing to push the new novel forward. So Diary of a Procrastinator, you can sign up for that, $5 a week at rightsforwomen.com/Patreon. So now on to the chat with Ber. See you in a couple of weeks. Ber Carroll, welcome to the Rights for Women Convo Couch.
Thank you, Pam. It's really lovely to be here. I don't think
It's
I've been on your convo couch before.
I know, it's amazing. And of course, it's a virtual couch, but we actually caught up a little while ago. I think it was at Maxine Fawcett's launch for Everything is Perfect. I think that was when I last saw you.
Yes, it was
And
a really memorable evening.
yeah, it was fabulous. And of course, we're so lucky that we get to go to all these brilliant launches. And very soon it is going to be your launch for this fantastic book that I can't wait to tell everyone about. One of Us is Missing. So much in here, Ber, that I want to talk to you about, and also just about your whole publishing career in general, because I feel like you are such an inspiration and there's writers out there who are going to be tuning in and I think are going to learn so much from this conversation because you've been around for a while now in the publishing industry, as have I. And there's so many things I want to chat to you about.
I hope I can answer those questions when I look back on, I think it's 20 years of being published. I'm just as confused as ever, but I think I'll be able to provide some insight.
Let's go back in time, Ber. Let's start, first of all, with when was the time that you thought, I really want to write a book or I want to be a writer? Are you someone who has written all your life, as many authors are, or did it come to you later in life?
I wouldn't say that I was somebody who wrote all my life, but I've read all my life. I've been an absolutely compulsive reader, have to always have a book with me, can't eat a meal without reading at the same time. When I was a kid, I was always missing whenever anything needed to be done. I was in a far corner of the house reading a book. So I was a real bookworm. And I think in the back of my head, I always wanted to write a book. And as soon as I finished university and I guess had a proper job, that's when I started writing. And I didn't think it would end up here, but in my head, I thought I'd like to write one book. I'll get it out of my system and then I'll move on with my life. And as you and I know, well, writing isn't that simple. It's very addictive and it's very hard to stop at just one book.
Definitely. So that book that you first wrote, was that an idea that you'd had brewing in your head for some time and you thought, yeah, I really want to get this story out? Or was it like you made the decision to write a book and then started thinking about what is it that I want to write?
I had made the decision I wanted to write a book, and I had recently arrived in Sydney, and I guess that was a big life change for me, going from a very rural part of Ireland. I grew up in Blarney, as in Blarney Castle. It's a tiny village outside of Cork City, which is a small city in Ireland, which is not a big place. To arrive into Sydney in the mid 1990s, it was a fairly drastic change, and it was a really exciting time here. And I got a job in a multinational IT company with some very interesting people. There were some really interesting people I was working with, and I thought to myself, "Oh my God, this is what I'll write a book about." An Irish girl coming to Sydney and getting a job in an IT company. I threw in a little bit of fraud, but when I look back, I think half the people who purchased that book purchased it to see if they were actually in it, my ex-colleagues. And I completely denied it was anyway about me, but of course it was completely. I can assure everyone now, I think 20 years along, I no longer write books. I do write them a little bit about sometimes things that happen to me, but they're no longer quite as blatantly based in my own life as when I first began. I think a lot of authors are like that. I think that's how they start.
Definitely. So the first book, was that Executive Affair?
Yes, that was
Yes.
executive pair. Even the title makes me cringe. It was so much a product of its time. Like on the front cover, the girl's wearing a white suit pants. That is such a product of its time.
But that was the thing, and that is the thing with publishing, isn't it? There's
It was
always
a
different
thing.
trends. Yeah.
And at the time, everyone was really proud of that cover. They loved it. They loved it. Initially in Ireland, they saw the Australian cover and were like, "Oh no, we're drawing our cover because we need to have that cover. That cover is amazing." And now I'm looking at the cover and I'm like, "Oh my God, it's so dated looking at it now."
So that was 12 books ago, wasn't it, Ber? Because I think one of us is missing is your
Yes.
12th book. Yeah. So when was
Yes.
Executive Affair published?
That was published in 2004. So exactly 20 years ago.
So yeah, you've definitely been doing this longer than me. My first book was published 2012.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what genre would you say Executive Affair is?
At the time, it was labeled women's fiction. And a lot of us had issues with that label, I think, at the time,
Mm.
because there was no such thing as men's fiction. Today, we would just say contemporary fiction. But in truth, there was elements in Executive Affair that were quite crimey. There was a corporate fraud, essentially, in the book. And in my second book, there was also a crime. And in my third book was probably more women's fiction, and my fourth. But there were crimes. Actually, there was somebody stabbed to death in my fourth book. But there was always Probably. And I do remember an early editor saying to me, because at the time women's fiction was extremely popular, it was selling really well. And I remember an early editor saying to me, "What's with it with you and the intrigue? Why are you keeping things back from the reader? That's not part of this genre. Can you lay off on that?" So it's
Okay.
funny how if I had received different advice back then, maybe I would have found myself in this genre a little bit sooner. Yeah. So it was
Isn't that
the
interesting?
yeah,
Yeah.
interesting, I guess, what comes and goes in terms of popularity. At the time, books like Marion Keyes and Kathy Kelly were selling truckloads. They still do, but they were the number one type of book that was selling. And a lot of us that were signed back then were signed to deliver to that particular genre.
Yeah. So you continued writing for publication. Who was your publisher back in at that time?
I think I've got surely got the Guinness Book of Records for the most publishers in Australia.
Oh, great.
Surely.
I really want to hear about this because I think this is a brilliant, and you and I were talking about this when we spoke at Maxine's. I think it's really good for authors out there to know, even if you are aiming for publication or if you've had one or two books published, is that the publisher you're with now might not be the publisher you're with in 2 or 3 years' time, or 5 years or 10 years. Like it can be a bit of a kind of merry-go-round, can't it? Where you're off on a different horse each
Yeah.
time. So really interested to hear about how that has evolved for you, Ber.
I mean, fundamentally, it's a very tough industry. And at the end of the day, I'd love to say it was me, publisher hopping, but it really wasn't. For somebody who has a background in business, as I do, the publishing industry is extremely and a lot more hardcore and brutal than anything I've ever gone through in business. When they are done with you, they are done with you. And it can be quite brutal. And sometimes not anything you've done wrong. It's just
Mm.
timing can work in your favor and it can also work against you. So that very first book was published here by Hachette. And at the same time, it was picked up by an Irish publisher on a 3-book deal. But I didn't last with Hachette very long. They didn't take up their option for the second book. For a while, I was published in Ireland and I wasn't published here. So that was the case for my second novel and my third novel. And then my my third novel did really well in Ireland. It got to number 4. And then suddenly publishers were once again interested
Ah,
here in picking me up. And then I signed a deal with Pam Macmillan and I published my 4th book with Pam Macmillan and I back published my first 3 books with Pam Macmillan.
okay. Even
Yeah.
that first one that had been out here with a different publisher.
Yes. It got a new cover, a much nicer cover, a bit more contemporary. And so in all I had 5 books with Pam Macmillan, but they were some of my earlier books. And in retrospect, I don't know if it was the right thing to re-sign those books. And at the
Right.
time, there was a lot of money involved because somebody else was bidding for that
Okay.
book. And so there was a lot of money on the line. And I guess that's not always a good thing either, because it was an advance that I could never really earn back. And then, so my 5th book came out with Pam Macmillan, but I already knew that I was on quite shaky ground because the print run wasn't great and it was a much more reduced publication. And I could see I was on very shaky ground. And then they rejected my 6th book, which
Okay.
was ready to go. And at that point, I reached it. It was probably my first really big crisis point where I was like, going, what am I doing? I don't have a publisher. Nobody's interested because I guess I'm not a writer virgin anymore. When you're a new debut author, everybody gets excited. But when you've been around for a while, it's hard to
Yeah.
get people excited. And out of just because the book was written and I knew it was a good book, I said, "Oh, I'll self-publish it." I didn't really want to self-publish it, I've got to say. And I do remember my agent at the time saying to me that self-publishing was a kiss of death, which was not very helpful at all. Because I said to him, "What's am I going to do with it? Nobody wants to publish it."
Mm.
And so I self-published it and it did okay. And all the libraries picked it up because they had all my backlists. So I guess it
Yeah.
also picked a proper distributor. So it was, even though it was self-published, it had a lot more backing perhaps than a normal self-published book because it had a distributor and it was as professional as what you could get. Got the same designer to do the cover. I got it professionally typeset. It looked good. And so when it went into libraries, it looked like just like any other book. Worlds apart. It's book 6. Yeah.
Yeah.
With the next I guess I had a bit more interest, and there was a few points where we almost got publishers over the line and we didn't quite manage it. And again, I was there and I had a finished book. And so I self-published that as well because in the end of the day, nobody signed a contract despite trying and very hard to achieve that. And then I guess the kind of miracle happened. Then a traditional publisher, this time it was Penguin UK, said, "Oh, actually, we really these books. We really like." And I had written another book. And it seems to me that when I'm at my bleakest and I'm doing first, I seem to write more. It's
Right,
almost like,
okay.
who cares? It's all lost anyway. I might as well just write a book.
Have you found that when you're doing that, it's like you're writing the book that you really want to write because you're not writing to
Yeah.
contract, you're just writing genuinely, what's coming out from your heart sort of thing?
Yeah. So that book that I completely wrote from my heart was The Missing Pieces of Sophie McCarthy, because at the time I'd already self-published 2 books. I had no intentions of self-publishing any other books. And I just thought, I'm just going to write this. I sort of want to dabble with having a character who's not as likable as my previous characters. I want to dabble with something darker. And that was the book that really got me back in the game, I guess. It was picked up by Penguin UK and then it was distributed here by Penguin Australia, and I was back in mainstream publishing. But I don't think I would have ever written that book had I not been out of contract and had my
Yeah.
backing wallet as such.
Isn't that
Um,
interesting? How did that come under the radar of Penguin UK?
just through my agent, because I was
Mm.
still really struggling here to get past my reputation, really. Does Even though that sounds terrible, right? When you're no longer published and if you're not selling very high numbers, it's really hard to get a publisher to pick you up here. And
I'm
so
hearing you. I've been through
I
exactly the
you
same
would
thing.
know that, right? And sometimes it's
Yeah, yeah.
nothing to do with the book. And in the end, with The Missing Pieces of Sophie McCarthy, there was quite a lot of interest from a number of overseas publishers. And I know now it was a good book. At the time, I was
Yeah,
like, I didn't know. I wrote what I wanted to write, but it didn't matter what I wrote here. There was no convincing a publisher at the time
yeah.
to publish me here.
How did you cope with that kind of mentally and emotionally? You mentioned book 6, I think, is your first crisis or whatever. But
Yeah.
how did you find that kind of having been traditionally published and all that sort of thing, and then suddenly you can't get a publisher here interested in your books? How did you cope with that mentally and emotionally?
Look, there was days when I was very stoic and just got on with the job and kept writing and did the best I could do. And then there was days when I was sobbing and a complete mess. And I guess you see, the thing is, you do feel like a failure. It's you're so invested in it, and it's funny because now I can look back over, I guess, the last 20 years and laugh at myself a little bit and go. I think Kate Mildenhall has said it's not a matter of life and death. These books, we're not like paramedics trying to save
True.
lives. So it feels good to us, and we have a lot invested, but a bit of perspective is really useful. But it is, I guess, when you love what you're doing and you want to keep doing it, and realizing that you might not be able to keep doing it, that is a bit devastating too. And you can't
Yeah,
pretend that it's not devastating. And I
yeah.
think you know how that feels, and a lot of authors know how that feels. And I guess the truth of it is that every new debut book publisher signs, they're probably dropping a mid-list
Mm,
author to make room for that debut book. And that's
mm,
the industry. But you don't
yeah.
know that when you're being signed or being dropped.
No,
And you
that's
don't
right.
have that perspective. And it took me many years to learn that perspective. And sometimes you hear that perspective from other authors who listen to a lot of podcasts and really
Mm.
study what's happening. I learn a lot from being around other authors, and I'm still learning every day
Every day. And
about
things
the books
change,
industry. Yeah.
don't they?
Yeah.
Things change so drastically over the years. And I think I'm the same. Even looking back, I don't think I realized at the time how much not getting another deal with Hachette after 4 books with
Yeah.
them. No, not that we've got anything against Hachette personally, but,
No, no.
I had a great
It's
relationship with my
yeah.
publisher there, like, really, and I know that she was devastated that they weren't gonna publish another book, but I think what I didn't grasp at the time, and it took me a long time to grasp, is it's a numbers game. It's a business. They're in the business of making money. And when the books aren't making the money, yeah, they're not meeting the financial expectations that the publisher had, it's not really anything to do with whether that book is well written or not, or whether the readers who did read it loved it or whatever. It's just purely, we're not making enough money out of you. So see ya, we're going to find somebody else. That's really the reality, isn't
Yeah,
it? Yeah.
it is the reality. And publishers aren't necessarily honest with us. I don't know if it's good to be honest or bad to be honest though, because I think if they really told us how they make decisions, we might not write books.
True. I think we're getting up to book number 8
Yeah.
in a minute. Sophie McCarthy, I think we're up to. But how did you mentioned you put 2 books out, self-published 2 books. You didn't really want to do it again. How did you find the whole experience of self-publishing? Were there kind of things that you did love about it and other things you didn't love? What was that like for you?
I didn't in the end, even though I didn't want to do it because my agent made me feel like it was the wrong step. I learned an awful lot about the industry in the process. I never really knew much about typesetting. I never knew much about cover designs. All the platforms were just starting to come into play, all the different online platforms. And I learned I learned a lot and I ended up enjoying it. And I think it ended up saving my career. In actual
Mm,
fact, it saved my career because it kept my name out there. And in particular, over that period, the librarians were very supportive of me, and both books got selected for a Together Read program based librarian. And that felt extra special because they were books that had been entirely produced by
yeah.
me, down to even using the cover. With lots of help, mind you, because I did hire all the right help. I
Yes.
knew and at that time, there was a lot of self-published books that you pick it up and you knew immediately that it was self-published. I wanted somebody picking up my book not to know that it was
Mm.
self-published. I wanted it to look exactly like my other books, and they did. So it's self-publishing. It really did save my career, I guess. It kept my name relevant and out there. Otherwise, I would have had, I think The Missing Piece of Sophie McCarthy finally was released in 2018, and Less Than Perfect, my traditional novel, was released in 2011, I think, or 12. So I had a period of about 6 years to 7 years there where I wouldn't have been heard of if I hadn't self-published those books, and I wouldn't
Yeah.
know. Any kind of readership that I had built up would have gone and dissipated in that time.
I was exactly the same. I had crossed my heart out, and I was the same as you, Bear. I just wanted it to look exactly the same as every other book on a shelf, and I think that's so important, is to do it really professionally, have it professionally edited, great cover, all that sort of thing. And like you, I learned so much in that process, and I'm certainly not sorry that I've done it, and I would do it again. But
Yeah, I don't know
yeah,
why I said I wouldn't do it again because it was all a positive experience. It
yeah,
saved my
it's a lot of
career.
work
It
though,
taught
isn't it?
me a lot. It is a lot of work, and maybe it's harder now as well to I think we might have hit a sweet point where you could successfully self-publish a book and sell a few thousand copies. I'm not sure if that's as easy anymore. But it's also, ironically, when I self-published, I got invited to so many more things because people wanted to know how to do it. So I
Yeah,
got invited to all these festivals and book events that I had never been invited to while I was traditionally published. It was
that's
quite
great. And like you
ironic.
say, it kept your name out there. You had books circulating, your readers were still finding your work. So was that first book that you self-published, was that Sophie McCarthy?
No,
No,
that was Worlds Apart, and then there was Once Lost,
Once Lost, yeah.
um, and then was The Missing Pieces of Sophie McCarthy, which was picked up by Penguin UK and sold in here, distributed by Penguin Australia. And then I hit another hiccup because I was no sooner feeling, oh my God, this has been really good. I'm back. And then my publisher left Penguin UK. And as also, when your publisher leaves,
Yeah.
that's a big thing. You've lost your champion within that particular publishing house. And it wasn't even that bad, or it became worse because the person who replaced her then left, and the person who replaced her then left.
Oh no.
Had an option for a second book with them, and they said, we don't have anyone who can even look at a second book at the moment, and we need to hire, and you can either wait for 6 to 12 months to 2 years, or, and I guess I didn't want to wait because I thought, oh, I don't even know who you're going to get, or if you're going to get someone, or if you're, that's another thing that happens to a lot of authors. Their publisher moves on, and sometimes they've lost their biggest supporter when the publisher moves on. So then had to go back to market again, but this time I did pick up another publisher, and this time it was Profile UK.
Okay.
And Pro- Profile UK published two of my books, and then they distributed those books here through Allen and Unwin. I'll summarize all the Australian publishers when I'm done, because
Yeah, it's really interesting.
so
I
they
actually
were
find
distributed here through Allen and Unwin, but both of those books came out during COVID.
like,
And I think the second of those books, You Had It Coming, didn't even, in the UK, didn't even make it out of the warehouses. Even Amazon was closed down. It was an entire shutdown.
oh,
Yeah. So at the end of those two books, I was once again without a publisher, but I then signed with a firm here in Australia, and I was back with a mainstream publisher in where I live, which felt really important.
yeah.
But in the meantime, I lost my UK publisher. So yeah, that's quite a
Wow.
story, isn't it?
It's
I
an
had
absolute roller coaster.
Ship and Macmillan, two self-published books that were distributed by Dennis Jones at the time, and then a Penguin UK book distributed by Penguin, Profile books distributed by Allen and Unwin, and then a firm. That's how
Wow.
many different people my books have been brought. Yeah,
But like I was saying, I think this is a great lesson for everyone out there. Look, if you get in with a publisher and everything's going well and there isn't any rocky patch, like fantastic. But, as we both know, we know so many people that have been with one publisher and then maybe have not been published for a while and find another publisher. Like it is actually quite a normal thing, isn't it? Like at the time when it happens to
yeah.
you feel like, oh God, I'm the only failure that this has happened to. But when you talk to a lot of people in the industry, this is actually quite a normal thing, isn't it? Look, I think all of that is so true. So with a firm, you mentioned that some of your earlier books, while they were women's fiction, had
Yeah.
this kind of mystery or element of intrigue. And it seems that in all your most recent books have been going that way and more into that crime genre. So when you got the contract with a firm, was your agent still just shopping your books around here, or even though you had
Yes.
the books out in the UK and all that sort of thing?
Yeah, it was shopping my books around here. And again, I was at a crisis point because I could see with the UK that things weren't going particularly well. And I didn't know if I could sell the book here. So it was a real save by the bell one again to get
Yeah.
the books in with the firm. But the books had got steadily, I guess, darker. And You Had It Coming, which was my second book with Profile, got shortlisted for the Davits and the Ned Kellys, which made me really think. I thought, oh my God, I'm really crime now. Because up until that point, I wouldn't have entirely classified myself as
Yeah.
crime. I'm still not really hardcore crime, as I'm
Yeah.
sure you'd agree. It's a much softer offering.
Yeah. So did that kind of then change your perspective on when you were going in to write a book, when you started thinking of yourself, even though it may be on the lighter end of the spectrum or whatever, of crime, did it change the way you approached the writing or thought about what you were writing?
It did, because my publisher at a firm, Martin Hughes, he's very honest. He's a very honest view of it. And look, he said you need, in my particular niche of crime fiction, you're after maximum tension, minimum bodies, right? We're not talking about lots of
Okay.
dead bodies. We're talking about maximum tension. But by the same token, a few times, and particularly with my recent book, One of Us is Missing, he went, "Oh, Ber, you've written a contemporary drama. This is true family drama. This needs way more attention. I was waiting for ages for this to happen, and you need to turn this book completely back to front because there's not enough tension." And so I guess I was still doing my same old thing.
Yeah. 'Cause
Easy.
it's definitely got that family drama element, but I have to say we'll get on to actually talking about the book in a minute. but it is loaded with tension. So whatever you did when you went back, you did brilliantly because there is so much tension in it.
The funny thing was, I didn't change the story at all. It was one of those weird things where I didn't change the story at all, but I completely changed the structure.
Okay,
And
hold that thought. We're
but
going to
it's
come back to that. Yeah.
no, it has changed how I write. And now I'm working on a draft book and I can hear his voice in my head saying, and an eye roll. I can see the eye roll going, this is very nice and everything, reading about this family, but where's the tension, Bert? And so I immediately went, okay, I won't start there. I'll put in a dead body here. And so I've changed what I'm doing. I suppose I have changed what I'm doing. But at the end of the day, I guess my thing that I won't ever change is that I want to write about people that I like and that I'm interested in and that I want them to be everyday people. And sometimes I pick up a crime book, and particularly in this genre, there's a lot of unlikable people. And I
Yeah.
think so unlikable, they're not real. So I still want them to be real and I want them to be somebody that you can relate to, but I have tried to up the tension to deliver to this genre.
Oh, you've done it magnificently. So now that we are here, let's talk about One of Us is Missing. Amazing. Like, I absolutely loved it.
You.
Could not put it down.
Thank you.
I have obviously an advanced reader copy here, but the real thing will be out very soon. So, can you tell listeners what is this book about? Who is the family that we meet, and what's the kind of setup?
Okay, so the book it's about a family of four who go to a stadium concert, and parents Rachel and Rory Sullivan bring their children, their teenage children, to a fictional Coldplay concert. And it's we've all been to, many of us have been to those concerts this year. There's 50 odd thousand people at this concert, and while they're at the concert, one of the family goes missing. And that's the premise of the book. And each of the four family members has a reason to go missing. They've each been going through different things. And as the clock ticks down, we find out the secrets that they've been keeping from each other. And also they find out that they have enemies that they didn't even realize that they had. And they realize that life is never going to be the same again after this particular night. Do you want to hear how I came up with the premise?
I started reading this not long after I'd been to the Taylor Swift concert, and I've been to
Okay,
quite a
okay.
few big concerts in that Allianz Stadium, Adele, Ed Sheeran. And one of the things that freaks me out is that kind of when, especially when you're coming out, because everyone arrives at different times, but everyone leaves at the same time. So one of the things that always freaks me out is walking out, particularly if you're getting public transport, is that walking out in this mass, absolute mass of people, and just that sensation of having so many people around you. And I don't know, I guess in the back of my mind, occasionally I have thought, oh, what if something happened here? What if, someone went crazy or whatever? And this isn't to give any spoilers away to the book because we're not talking about that, but it really struck a chord with me. That was where it was set because I could picture it and I knew that feeling of that mass number of people and what it would be like to try and find someone in that crowd. But yeah, please tell me what the inspiration was for it.
Okay. So the inspiration happened quite a number of years ago. It was in 2019 and it was a U2 concert. And my children were a bit younger then. My oldest was 17, my youngest was 14. And while I was trying to get tickets to this concert, first of all, they were really keen to go because I guess music is a very intergenerational thing. We grew up liking the music that our parents listened to. Our children grew up liking some of the music. We listened to some of their music because you're in the
Yeah.
car with each other all the time. You're at home with each other all the time. Concerts are intergenerational, I think, and
Yeah.
they're a great way for families to bond. So anyway, the kids did want to come to this UT concert. They were really keen. And I was trying to get 4 seats to the concert and I couldn't. There was only 2 seats left. I had a clock ticking down and my son was like, we'll go on the field, we'll go on the field. And there was still a few seats left on the field. And I was like going, but you're only 17 or 14 and that's not the whole purpose of this. But literally I had 30 seconds left to do this transaction. And even it ended up, it was either that or nothing, really.
Mm.
And I ended up getting 2 stand tickets and 2 field tickets. And I thought to myself, oh God, I don't know if that's a good idea. And look, I know that probably sounds very helicopter, and I'm a self-confessed helicopter parent. I'll say that straight up. But when you're in a crowds like that, you're talking about relatively inexperienced teenagers. They're not familiar with Allianz
Yeah.
Stadium, familiar with that side of the city. Yeah, if it was in our local suburbs, they would be fine, but they're not familiar with the city or navigating their way
Mm.
around. And I guess I had a 17-year-old who was extremely overconfident. I know everything about
That's
everything.
right.
It's all
That
fine.
age. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and then a 14-year-old who literally is just the worst sense of direction you've ever seen in your life. And so I knew it was probably a bad idea. And of course, when it came to the night and we're walking there and there's thousands and thousands of people walking there, all I could think was like, what have I done?
Oh my God.
And then I was trying to convince them. I was like, going, okay, Ash, you come in the stands with me. Connor, you go in the field with your dad. I was trying to reorganize and they weren't having any of it. So anyway, as we got there, and then there's also that thing when you come out of a stadium, and I think you particularly notice this when you're out at Homebush, they're huge, right? And when you come out, you don't know where you're going to come out. And
Mm.
sometimes,
No, it's that kind of circular thing. And did you
yeah,
come out this side or do you go, like, where did you enter? Where are you leaving? It's quite
yeah, you don't know
disorienting.
that. And you particularly don't know that when you're 14 and 17, right?
Yeah.
And you don't know the area. So anyway, during this whole concert, I was up in the stands, worrying myself sick, particularly about my 14-year-old down in that mosh pit, worrying myself absolutely sick. And that's where the idea of the novel came from. And of course, it's great to have an idea for a novel. That's a really good premise. But then you've got to figure out, okay, someone is missing. What's happened?
Yeah.
And really not easy to
Yeah.
figure out what's happened.
So how do you go from there, Ber? Like you're in this crimey genre. You've got this idea. Can you remember where you went with that idea? Like how do you sit down and then nut out what's your process in nutting out the plot?
I never really nut out the plot, Pam. I make life really hard for myself
Yeah, me
by
too.
not planning anything. But with this story, I just started. Initially, I started the book 4 months before, and I guess I got to know each character just through writing each character and figuring out what was going on in their lives. That could have led them to the point of one of them not turning up at the meeting place after the concert. And so I explored that by writing
Mm.
it in that form. And when I got to the night of the concert, I guess I knew which one of them wasn't going to turn. And then I was immediately had written myself into another problem as to what had happened to them. And I don't know, I'm the kind of writer, there's some areas as a crime writer I don't want to go.
Yeah.
So I kept thinking, I don't want to go into this and I don't want to go into that. And that's just far too gruesome. And no, I can't do this and I can't do that. And everything I thought of, I was like, going, oh no, that's too dark. So it took me a long time to figure out what it was that had happened. And I guess
Mm.
I just fighting until I figured it
So you very
out.
much learn things as you go, writer.
Yeah. Yeah. As soon as I tried to plan the books, they're just boring. I'm just so bored. I'm like going, oh, this is just boring. And I keep telling myself my life would be so much easier if I planned. And I think all of us pantsers say that our life would be so much easier if we planned. But there's something about, for me, how I come up with ideas is when my fingers are on the keys. That's
Yeah.
what generates ideas in my head. It doesn't matter if I'm sitting there with a whiteboard. I could look at it all day long. I wouldn't be able to think of a single idea. I have
Mm.
to be typed to come up with ideas.
I'm exactly the same. I find, and I should have realized this years ago. I said to my husband the other day actually about horse riding, I said, I'm just think I'm a really slow learner. He said, which he probably nailed it. He said, no, you just don't have enough confidence in your own ability. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But I find with writing and what I'm working out with this one I'm working on now is that part of the whole thing with the pantsing for me is being in that character's skin in that moment or at the end of that scene that you've just written and thinking, what am I going to do now? Or what would she do
Yeah.
next? Or what could happen that would really throw her world into turmoil? But I've got to be in that moment to work it out.
Yeah. I'm the same. And I think that's why I do it. And then at the end of the day, I go, oh my God, who knew? Who knew that would happen? I certainly didn't. And I'm addicted to that feeling.
And I guess if you're
Yeah.
creating that
But it
feeling for
would,
yourself, then you're also creating it for your readers, aren't you?
Yes. But then I went and I had to turn this book back to front because my publisher said it's too much of a contemporary
So tell us about
family
that.
drama.
How did you go about doing that?
He wanted a plan, Pam.
Oh
He
no,
wanted,
scary.
and I was like, a plan? And so I do. I have pulled out the spreadsheet in the past during editing when I've been asked to do tricky things in editing, because when I'm writing, I have a very firm hold on what's happening where and what's happening when, and I have a really good hold on it. But as soon as you start shifting things around, you lose that hold. You become confused really quickly about, and crime is different. It's, you can ruin the book, really, but if you move things around in the wrong way, you can completely ruin the book. So he insisted on a plan. So I had to do a chapter. I did a spreadsheet just with chapter summaries for him. And it was really reorganizing my chapters. But it was like, I was like, I can't believe I'm doing this. I cannot believe that I'm doing a plan for this edit. Whereas normally I would just dive in. I would normally dive in. But in retrospect, it was very good advice because what I was trying to do was a lot more complicated than what I thought it was. I said to myself when he said, "Oh, I think you need to start at the concert. We need to start at the concert and then flash back in time." And I was like, that's easy. I've done that before. I've done flashbacks before. That's easy. But it actually wasn't easy at all. And in fact, it turned out to probably be one of the most difficult rewrites I've ever done.
Wow. So you'd already written the draft. Were you shuffling scenes that you already had? Did you then have to add new bits and new perspectives
Yeah,
and things?
loads of new bits, no new perspectives, but loads of, and the story in itself didn't change except for the who did it. The who did it did change, but the
Okay.
story in itself didn't change. But the changing the timing of the story meant that there was a lot of back and forth. So even if you look at how the book starts, that very first chapter, I had to say who all the people were that were involved, even though there's a lot of names early on, because I can't pretend they don't exist. Whereas with the previous version, I was able to introduce the characters in a much more gradual way. So
Yeah.
that type of thing where I can't deny there's a big thing, there's a few big things happening here. I can't just show them getting ready for the concert without showing their concern about these big things that are happening. And so it was extremely tricky not to trick the
Mm,
reader, really. I
yeah.
had to be honest with the reader about what was going through their head at the time while they were getting ready for the concert. And then also there was necessary repetition. There was necessary repetition because I had to help the reader navigate back and forth
With the time frame.
with the
Yeah.
time frame. And I think through the rewrite, I think I added at least 20,000 words that then
Wow.
later axed in different places, but it was a much more complicated rewrite than,
Yeah.
because initially, that's not a problem. No problem. I can do this. And then,
I've written 11
and
books. I can do this.
yes, I was definitely overconfident and underestimated what was involved. And
Right.
I very quickly I realized, oh, I'm going to start with a new file and the file is going to be blank. And I
Okay.
will copy and paste, but I'll only copy and paste once I know that's belongs in there. So I did
Okay.
build it up from
Wow. That was going to be my next question, actually. How did you practically manage that? Like I was at my writing group today, the Inkwell, with the lovely Joanna
yeah,
Nell was there. So she has scene cards where she writes a summary of what's happening. And because now she's on book number 6 or whatever, so she knows roughly the kind of structure that she's using. So she'll
yeah.
have index cards, and I have used index cards a lot in the past myself. But yeah, so you started with a blank document, you had your draft, and was it then a matter of just pulling things out and moving them around?
Started on page 1 and I said, okay, it's the day of the concert. What can I use? And then I massaged it. And once I was happy with what I had massaged, I then went, okay, now they're walking to the concert. What can I keep? And then I brought in that and then I massaged it to change it around and I built it up like that. And then it became very obvious. Okay, I need this extra scene here and I need this extra scene there. And I put those in as I went. I didn't allow myself go forward or go back. without
Okay.
putting in what I needed. And even if it meant new writing, yeah.
Because it does move around in time, but like we go back, but then it comes back to the concept. Like there's a lot of time shuffling. I'm terrible with
Yeah.
timelines, my worst nightmare. But how did you work out how far back to go and when to put in a scene from 3 weeks ago as opposed to a scene from 3 hours before they went to the concert?
That was the easier part. The going back was the easy part because I had written that kind of in a more intact, I guess, that's how the novel had originally started. It originally started 4 months before the concert. So when you're flashing back to 4 months, that was needed massaging and needed fixing and a few extra things put in. But it was largely written. But it
Mm.
was the current time that caused me the biggest
Oh,
trouble because I had to elongate what was happening at the concert. And I had to do that in a way that didn't give away what was going to happen in the next 80,000
yeah.
of the novel. A lot of what's happening at the concert is new, and a lot of what you flash back to was pre existing.
Did you have to kill a lot of darlings? Were a lot of darlings left out, floundering?
No, actually, I had to,
Okay.
no, I didn't have to kill any darlings. And I know I'm the worst person ever, Pam, for having too many characters. Honestly, every time I write a book, I'm like going, "Oh my God, Ber, can you just cut out the number of characters?" I drive myself mad, but I just don't know how to make it real.
Yeah, it didn't confuse me, the number of characters.
I didn't have to kill any darlings, but I did struggle with, I guess, the introduction of those darlings because of the structure. All came at once, and they needed to all come at once because we are at the climax of the book
Yeah.
at the start.
Yeah.
And so you can't pretend that they don't exist. They have
Yeah.
to exist.
You had to change the structure in order to up the tension. What were some of the other things that you did at a page or chapter level in terms of really making sure that there was plenty of tension in there?
I had a lot of it in there, but it was delivered in a more gentle way. And I do remember my publisher saying to me, he said, "You've gone there anyway, Burr. By the end of the novel, you have gone fairly dark. So I don't know what you're trying to avoid." And so I guess that was really interesting. One thing I would say I did have to do was I had to miss those red herrings,
Mm,
of which there was quite a number, actually. I think I'm learning how to write crime as I go. I don't know all the rules. Do you know what I
yeah,
mean?
which might be a good
And
thing that you don't know the rules.
lots of rules I don't know. And so apparently I had, and this is from an author friend, Govern, who is really a bit like your Inky's. She's like my Inky. Her opinion means a lot. And she's very, "You can kill off any of these red herrings at any point." And I was like, okay, yeah, I guess. Because you really write crime and you really know what you're doing. I didn't really know what to do. I'm a bit of a novice, I think, when it comes to writing this genre.
It didn't read like you're a novice, but and one of the things that I loved were the kind of particularly at the beginning, there is different lengths of chapters, but those really short, snappy chapters I found were really compelling and just really helped add that tension and that sense that, oh, I want to read the next chapter to find out what happens for the next character.
Okay. Oh, that's good. That's
Yeah.
good. Actually, that was one other thing that was very challenging. These two teen voices. I haven't done that before. I don't know if I will do that again. That's not easy.
Yeah.
Luckily, I had some experts in the house.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I'd say you've got 4 point of view characters.
Yeah.
Did you see any one of those characters as your kind of main character, or do you feel that they were all pretty much equal in terms of the level of importance to the story?
When I started off, I think Rachel was my main character. She's the mum, and always because you can identify with the mum more because you are a
Yeah.
mum. She's closer in age to you. But I guess as the book went on, the other characters got stronger. They got stronger, and by the end, certainly Bridie has come to the fore a lot more, and
Mm.
Rory, the dad, has come to the fore a lot more, and they've all garnered sympathy. And in some ways, Rachel, I guess, because of some of her decisions, some people judge her quite harshly. I didn't judge her harshly, but I think some readers do judge her harshly. So the different voices in this book were a challenge as well. And through every rewrite, I was constantly trying to improve them. It was one discussion here one night where we had a big family debate about what you would call druggos and druggies and what different age groups call them. And so even between my now 21-year-old and 19-year-old, there's different lingo, there's different,
Mm.
they use different words. That was an ongoing challenge throughout the novel, trying to channel those teen voices. And also in a way that mature adults want to read, because we don't
Yeah.
always want to read from the point of view of much younger people.
But I think one thing that having those multiple point of view characters does, and you did distinguish their voices really beautifully. So we knew as each chapter moved on, we got to the next person, there was a really distinct sound to the voice, and Bridie's voice was different to her mother's, and et cetera, the other two as well. But I think one of the things that does, swapping point of views, is it really does help with that upping the tension, because we get into one character's skin and one character's head and perspective, and we're empathizing with that character. But then that stops and we're into the next character. So you automatically want to know, no, I want to go back and see what's happening with Rachel next. So it pulls you through the story because you are constantly shifting character experience. And I find that really compelling.
As
In,
crime writers, different point of view is our friend. It's
mm,
100% our friend. It gives us a chance to leave someone in a real predicament and then go on to something else
yeah,
and then
yeah.
write that person into predicament and then go back. And it helps us hugely in terms of writing the novel.
When you finished that whole restructuring thing, did you know, like, immediately,
Yeah,
yes, that's it, I've got it?
I didn't know. Yes, I got it. And I was actually really nervous. I was really nervous because I'd gone from a novel I thought that I really knew what the kind of flashpoints were to a novel
Mm.
where I didn't know any more of what the flashpoints were. And so before I handed it back to my publisher, I gave it to more readers than what I've ever done before.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I think I gave it to about 6 or 7 people to read it to see, did they know who did it? Did the timing of who did it come at the right time? Did they believe it? And whilst their feedback reassured me, they all had very valuable things to say still. And I'm always extremely grateful for people who read your books and very kindly lend their intelligence to the plot and help you make it a better book. And I think I had achieved the main things I set out to do. But obviously, when you've done a restructure to that level, there's always some small things that you haven't addressed, and you need fresh eyes on the book. And so before I sent it back, I had given it to 6 other readers, and so by the time I'd taken their feedback on board, and which wasn't drastic by any means, but it made me feel a lot more confident with what I was sending back.
And was it a thumbs up from your editor then?
It was a thumbs up, but they were horrified by how long the book had become.
Oh, really? Well, now it's too long. Go and cut some of it.
I had to delete, I think they wanted me to delete 15,000 words, but I deleted 10,000 words in a line edit and then another 2,000 during copy edit.
Wow. I think for that tightening that you did just improved it even further, because I think one of the things with that pacey sort of high tension reading is that there's no extraneous words. And I think you've really nailed that.
Oh, thank you. It's so hard to know when you've changed it that profoundly. And again, as I said, I was trying to help the reader with the back and forth so that they wouldn't be confused about what was happening before and what was happening after.
So you have chapter headings for that, don't you?
I do have chapter headings, but the reader still needs reminding of the time and what's happening with time. You need to help
Mm,
them a little.
mm.
And really, honestly, Pam, probably it was the most, and I've done some hard rewrites in my day. I really have. This book, whilst it was very easy to write that first draft, was probably the most difficult restructuring I've ever done. Because normally, when hard restructuring is deleting characters or combining chapters or doing all
Mm.
that sort of things, can all be very tricky. But this was just next level trickiness.
And were you working to a deadline, I imagine, too? But
Yeah, and I don't sit at my desk. If I change the camera, you would see where I write, which is literally an armchair. It's very bad for my posture. I sit in an armchair with my laptop on my lap. And again, it's a bit something I need to be in that position before I can write. Right. And if I try and write at a table or a desk, I can't do it.
Isn't that funny? We all
I
have our
know.
little quirks. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's whatever releases that creativity in your head,
Yeah.
right? But I sat in that armchair for so long, I got swollen ankles.
Oh no.
I have never, it was like being on a long haul flight. I was like going, what has happened to my legs? There's something wrong with me. And then I realized it was because I'd been sitting there for 12 hours a day moving. Mm. Yeah, that was a new thing. Thank you. One of us is missing for giving me swollen ankles.
I'm picturing you pulling on the compression socks or something
I
every time
know.
you sit down.
Yeah, it was full on.
Oh. We haven't talked a lot about the characters and things. I don't want to go too much into the actual story because it's very hard to avoid spoilers. You mentioned earlier the secrets thing. So all of the characters have secrets. They're really important in kind of, there's some things that the reader knows at some points that the other characters don't know. The reader knows things about happening in the background for some of the other characters that Rachel, for instance, might not know. Was that all already there in your initial story, or did you deliberately plant some of those secrets? Are they some of the red herrings you were talking about?
I think I
Yeah.
ramped mistakes for some of those things, but they were all there. And that's what made the rewrite so weird. And that's why I was saying, why was it so hard when there was no characters deleted, there was no scenes deleted. It was all adding. It was adding to be able to accommodate the new
Mm,
structure. But I did increase the stakes with those particular secrets and all the while trying to, it was very important to me that this family was a likable family and that they loved each other. I was trying to make them a normal family that have just been struggling with various things rather than making them all toxic. So I was
yeah,
trying to keep the
yeah.
balance right all the time. Sometimes having that type of aim in crime fiction is hard.
Can imagine. You mentioned that word stakes, Burr, and it's something that every book I have to really think about. And usually that's what I have to go back and really increase, I think, is what's at stake for this character. Can you talk a little bit
Yeah.
about the importance, well, in writing in general, and maybe in this book in particular, for how important increasing those stakes are in terms of creating that whole arc where you can pull the reader through to the end of the story?
I think it's absolutely crucial. And the big thing we're struggling with is increasing the stakes in a believable way, in a
Mm,
way. And also, if you manage to do that in a believable way, your reader will be, I guess, they'll be hooked and they'll be invested in the character. They will like these characters and they will be seriously invested in them. And I think when I was trying to increase the stakes, and I thought about this afterwards, and even though while I was doing it, I probably couldn't coherently tell you what I was trying to do.
yeah.
But I think what I did was I tried to increase the fear, their
Okay.
fears. Then that on the night, as each of them went into that stadium, they each had different fears that they were grappling with. Rachel had a serious illness, a life threatening illness, and obviously she was afraid for her future. She was afraid of her
Mm,
children being left motherless. And Rory was afraid that his marriage wasn't the
mm,
same after that illness, and he was afraid of speaking up and rocking the boat in the marriage. And Emmett is afraid of failure, as many teens are.
mm,
And Bridie is afraid of, she's lonely, essentially. She's really
mm,
lonely. And her family don't know the extent of her loneliness. And so they carried all those fears in there that night. And then when the worst thing happens, they realize actually the big fear is the fear of the unknown and what has happened here and what have we done to cause this
mm.
situation. And I guess once I grasped onto that fear, that immediately, I think, raises the stakes.
That's so important, Bert. And just what you were saying then, I think that's about the believability and the fact they are such an ordinary family. And I think that's what you relate to as a reader. Certainly what I related to is, even though you might not have been in exactly that situation as any of the characters, you've been in a similar situation, or people who have been in a similar situation dealing with a life-threatening illness, and or having a child who is having friendship issues at school and how much that can impact on them. And the other thing is also that sense of, in a family, of not saying anything about those fears because you don't want to upset others, or that you're afraid that you're revealing something about yourself that even your people closest to you don't know. You really captured all
Yeah.
that, I thought, so nicely.
Thank you. Thank you.
There is a fair bit of police kind of procedure at different parts of the book. How much research did you have to do, Ber, into some of those kind of technical aspects of policing that appear in the book?
I did have to do a fair bit of research, and I found policing hard to research because they particular chief inspector who helps me and a detective who helps me, but they're really busy people. So I have to choose my questions really carefully. I will ask one question and I will get a very quick response. And then I have to say, okay, that's not what I thought. I better alter this. I do have a criminal lawyer who helps me, and who helped me particularly towards the end of the novel. There's a scene towards the end of the novel that, had I written it the way I had written it, would have been completely inaccurate. And he helped me fashion that particular scene. And he's helped me
Yeah.
now with a number of my books. And he always says to me, you need to stop stressing, because if you look at what's on TV, it's so inaccurate that this is actually way closer to the truth. Even in its inaccurate form, it's way closer to the truth than anything we watch on TV about crime. But he has helped me with a number of my novels now. And I always imagine him in his kind of city office laughing at the questions I sent him, the very obscure questions I sent him. And I did very luckily know somebody who works in security in a large stadium. And
Oh.
and this was during COVID actually, he let me see what they can see through their CCTV, and their CCTV is amazing. It's absolutely amazing. But of course, it's useless when you've got 50,000 people there because you can't see anything. But it is amazing. And so he was also very helpful. I think the thing when it comes to research now with every single novel, I have nothing to draw on myself. So I have to research practically everything because everything is new. And I'm trying to write something that's fresh
Yeah.
every time.
You learn something from every novel, don't you?
Oh God,
Yeah.
more than one thing. And I often think like what you said earlier, am I just a slow learner? How am I still learning this crap? After 20
I know.
years and one novel.
Each time I do it, it feels like I'm doing it for the first time. And until I get to a point and I think, oh, yeah, I do know what I'm doing.
Yes,
Sorry, but when is this book actually out,
that's
please?
on the 30th of April.
30th of April. Okay. Yeah, this will be out probably that week or the week after. Now, I do believe
Yeah.
you are going to a Coldplay concert later in the year.
Yes, I am going to a Coldplay. So this is the funny thing about this book, right? It was written during, yeah, a lot of it was written during COVID. And then we didn't even know if there was ever going to be a music concert ever again, right?
Mm.
It looked pretty bleak there for a while. It really did. And I think this is the first year they really come back in force. And so Coldplay have been in Sydney for a number of years. And now suddenly they're coming in the same year that the book is coming out, which is quite ironic. And so when they announced the concert, I was like, oh my God, I've got to get tickets. But oh my God. And of course, the whole family wants to go. The whole family wants to go. But this time I'm going down on the field with the
Are you going
kids
to
and
handcuff them,
everyone.
one on each hand?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. But everyone's laughing because they're like, "Well, Robert jinxed us. You totally jinxed us." You know. In fact, I know lots of people are going to that concert because I think they're doing 4 consecutive. Are you going, Pat?
No, I missed out on tickets. I can't believe
Oh
it.
God.
Yeah.
I think they're doing 4 consecutive nights. So I know lots of people going to that Coldplay concert, and hopefully they won't be thinking about my book and they'll be enjoying the concert.
There'll be some great promotional opportunities there, Burr. So make sure you take lots of photos. And I'm just seeing
You
Chris Martin in the background and the yellow balls and your book in the foreground.
will.
Now, Burr, this has been such a great chat. And thank you for staying on so long. We've covered so much territory. But I like to finish up with a question, which sometimes we've touched on. But what would you say is at the heart of your writing?
Everyday people is at the heart of my writing. I'm not interested if they're super rich or super successful, or I'm interested in everyday people finding themselves in really hard situations and what they'll do in those situations. And I think I want you to essentially like my characters and believe in my characters.
You've definitely nailed that with this book. And
Thank
because
you.
we've been talking so much about the publishing industry and something that I did mean to say earlier, which I think might be a great kind of thing to finish on, is the thing that you have continued to do, Bert, all through all those 20 years and lots of disappointments and not really knowing who was going to publish your next book or how it was going to be published, is you've kept writing. And I think that's the key, isn't it?
It is the key, and in many ways, it's very liberating because once you've figured that out, you'll be happy. You'll be happy. And it's really hard to stop writing, isn't it? In some
Mm,
ways,
mm.
it's really hard to stop. It can be hard to do it when you need to do it as well, but it's hard to stop doing it when you love it. So I think once you hold on to that, you never really know what's going to happen. And once you don't expect a smooth ride, I think if you're prepared for a few bumps along the road, then you'll be well equipped for what's ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect note to finish on. Thank you so much for All the
Thank you,
Best with
Pam.
One of Us is Missing. Great book. Please, everybody out there, just as a great reading experience, but particularly also if you're a writer and wondering how to get tension into your writing through all those things we talked about on the page, through the lines, the structure, the plot, everything. Fantastic read. And I will see you, Ber, at Warringah Mall on the 3rd of
Oh,
May.
fantastic. I'll see
Yeah.
you then, Pam.
Bye.
Bye.